Our next presenter has a background in science. He has a BS in biology with honors from Brown University. He studied in the PhD program at the University of California in molecular biology and biochemistry. He is passionate about helping people learn to live healthier and younger by affecting their own genes. He has given talks on gene expression and health and longevity around the US, China, Japan, and the Philippines. He is currently the director of the veterinary services at the Oregon Tiger Sanctuary, a nonprofit exotic animal sanctuary. Please help me welcome my good friend and colleague, Robert Nagato Needleman. Good to see you.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to be back at this Longevity Summit this year. I'm actually very appreciative to be here at all. In October this year, I was diagnosed with a aggressive form of lymphoma. And just 2 months ago, I finished 6 rounds of a very powerful chemotherapy regime. And between my medical assistants and my beautiful wife, Christine, my incredible sister, Amaji, the grace of God, and some very powerful supplements I take, I'm completely cured now and completely free of cancer. So. So I wanted to give you a little background because the talk I'm about to give you is purely based in science, but from my own personal experience as well, I apply what I'm about to talk to you about. I'm turning 50 this year and I feel about 30 or so in my energy, my life force, my age. So anyway, my talk today is on the secret to longevity being in our own genes. And what I want to talk about is the process of aging. And aging traditionally is not something that we really enjoy in the sense of feeling more tired or aches and pains or different things that can happen, you know, vision issues, slowing down, whatever it is. The aging process for most people isn't really that fun. Although the process of getting older in terms of wisdom gain and things like that, becoming kinder is good. But the aging process of the physical body is something that I really want to talk about today. Because I want to ask the question, what if you could actually have a say in how you age? What if you could determine your own aging process? And you may or may not know this, but most cells in our body have absolutely no idea how long we've been on the planet. So, for instance, the majority of cells, actually a lot of them are only about 90 days old, but most cells are less than 10 years old in our body. So literally, just about every year or so, we regenerate a new liver. Every 10 years, our skeleton turns over, new cells. Red blood cells only have a life of maybe 4 months. Our skin cells, surface layers of the skin, just a couple weeks turning over. So my point is that our body doesn't know. We've been on the planet 50 years. Most of your cells have not. And that's an important thing to think about. So the question is, why do some people age slowly and other people age much more quickly? Because there's a dramatic difference. Here's one example. Both of these women are 74 years old. Obviously, one looks a lot younger and healthier than the other one. So the question is, what's different in this process? Because everyone ages differently. And this quest for finding the fountain of youth has been around forever. As you know, humanity forever is searching for the magic elixir, if you will, for youth. A ton of money's been spent, a ton of time. And what's really amazing is all this time, the answer's actually been inside us. The key to longevity is literally inside of us. So one way to think about the aging process is that tissue damage starts to exceed tissue repair. Meaning, if you think about when we're younger, you know, you scrape your knee or something, it heals really fast. As we get older, the breakdown of tissue actually starts exceeding how fast it can repair. And that's just one example, but I'm going to use that kind of as a marker for what can lead to what we call age-related frailty, or the feeling or looking older. The question is, what is driving this process? Because if we want to affect how we age, we need to be able to understand it. So a very reasonable question to ask, is aging genetic? You know, are we just born with genes and that's predetermined how we're going to age? Because a lot of people have been conditioned to believe that. So we're going to look at some science in order to address that question. Identical twins have exactly the same DNA. And I made a little picture here. So literally, sperm fertilizes the egg divides into two cells, and each of those two cells, they're exactly the same, become a baby. They share the placenta, and you have identical twins. Now, what's interesting about twins is they don't age the same. So for instance, here, the twin on the right looks much older, okay? Her skin's different. She's a smoker. She's had more sun exposure. They've had different emotional experiences, different diets. But the point here is their genes are exactly the same, and yet they're aging completely differently. Here's another example. There's many examples of these in the studies. Another example, identical twins, same exact DNA, aging very differently. And this one we put side by side, and it becomes even more dramatic. Twin A, twin B. And they came from the same exact egg, but they've aged very differently. Another kind of identical twins you may or may not realize are all the organs in your body. If we took a cell from your heart and your liver and your lungs, they would all look the same genetically, but look how different those organs look, and they do very different functions. So again, identical DNA, very different function. So twins are now something that can tell us a lot, okay? Because they're genetically identical, same DNA, but they're not aging the same way. So what's different? What is different in these twins as they age? This is where we need to talk about something called genetics versus genomics, or what I'm going to talk a lot about is gene expression. Genetics being the genes we inherit versus genomics, how all those genes work together and interact with the environment, things like that. So genetics is really the alphabet of life, okay? There's a sequence of DNA, letters in the DNA code, code for proteins, and that carries all the information to make the proteins we need for our body, the enzymes, structural proteins, everything. So we inherit DNA, we inherit chromosomes, 23 pairs, a pair from our mother, a pair from our father, and that's our genes, okay? But these genes are a blueprint. And I made just kind of a interesting, almost funny picture. It's a blueprint of a brain, but the DNA holds the information that we need to make all of our proteins. But it's just a blueprint, okay? Just like a blueprint for a house. You can build a house from a blueprint, but it's only the information. Another way to think of it is DNA chromosomes are like a set of encyclopedia. They store information. And that kind of dates some of us, I guess, because you don't really see encyclopedias around anymore. But I thought it was a good visual because it's really important to understand that DNA stores the information. It's a blueprint. Gene expression we're going to call the grammar of life. And this is where things start to get interesting. There's a book called DNA that was written by Dr. Watson, who's one of the scientists who identified the structure of the DNA molecule. Well, if I handed everybody in this room a copy of this book, DNA, you'd all have a totally different experience. And that's where gene expression comes in. So this basic blueprint of our DNA can be read in a huge number of ways. It gets interpreted. Just like the same book is not going to be experienced the same by any two people because all of us have different perception, different history, things like that. Another way to think of it's like a map. So the genes are all the map. The roads on the map are like all the genes, but there's a ton of different ways to get from New York to San Francisco. And that would be gene expression, the pathways that are chosen, the genes that are used. Another way to think of it's a sound mixing board. And I'm a sound engineer, so I like this analogy. Each one of the channels on the soundboard are like a gene. The level to which they're either off or on to a certain degree is the expression of the gene. So there's going to be patterns in our gene expression that signify health or signify longevity, staying young. There's other patterns for getting older. There's other patterns for disease, okay? But these patterns are very critical, and you can see there are huge number of ways to set all those faders on the mixing board, and yet there's a finite set of genes that's being used, or mixer channels, okay? So now I want to give a couple examples from nature that are really quite profound. So the honeybee gives us a really good example of gene expression. There's 3 types of bees in the honey hive and the honeybee hive. Worker bees, the females, drone bees are the males, and then there's one mature queen bee. Now the question is, how do you make a queen bee? Well, what's very interesting is all the females are genetically identical in the hive. And initially, they're all fed royal jelly by the other worker bees. Every bee except one gets switched over really early on to pollen and nectar, and they become worker bees. One bee is continued to be fed royal jelly, and she turns into a queen bee. So you have all these huge number of genetically identical bees. One of them becomes the queen. They all have the potential to be the queen bee. And that's kind of an underlying theme that I want to keep coming back to here. We all have this massive potential to be anyone we want, as healthy as we want, as young as we want. And this was simply through changing the diet of one of the bees. And what happens? She makes 2,000 eggs a day. The worker bees are sterile. She's 3 to 5 times bigger, and she lives 20 times longer. And all they did was change her diet. Okay? So, diet is causing changes in gene expression that's creating a queen bee. It's not just the genes. They all had the same genes. Same with a caterpillar to butterfly. Here's a cocoon and there's a butterfly being born. They're genetically identical. This caterpillar, this butterfly, same exact genes, totally different use of those genes. And I'm going to keep showing you pictures like this because you have to rethink this whole process, because a lot of us were taught that, you're born with your genes and that's what you get, and it's not true scientifically. So genetics we can think of, it's kind of being written in pen. Our genetics doesn't change all that much in our life. Gene expression, how the genes are used, can be thought of as written in pencil, because it can be erased, it can be changed, it can be rewritten. And it's all the time changing, okay? If we all gave a blood sample, then and checked the gene expression in our blood, then everybody ate an apple. 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, we took another blood sample. Thousands of genes will have changed in your bloodstream. And that's happening all the time. Right now, your body's constantly modifying its gene expression. Now, twins, when we come back to twin studies, again, the twin on the right is aging much more rapidly. Well, this time we're going to look at their chromosomes. And what they found was that the gene expression is different between the twins. So although they have, those chromosomes are genetically identical, how they're using them changes. And what happens with twins is when they're younger, so this is 3-year-old, the chromosomes are expressed, the genes are expressed much more similarly. As they age, there becomes much more and more divergence in how the genes are used. So 50-year-old twin uses their genes, the two pairs, much differently from each other, much more so than when they were first born. And these are what we need to explore. Genetics also, there's your twins, identical twins. Huge difference in body composition and also extremely different use of genes. Gene expression is different between these two. Diseases are the same way. There's a healthy twin right here. These are genetically identical twins. Her twin sister, unfortunately, has Alzheimer's disease. But these both have the same DNA. So something else is going on here. So the difference between these twins is not genetic changes. They're genetically the same. The difference is in the way they're using their genes, what we're calling gene expression. And sometimes you'll hear the word epigenetics. That means above genetics. Epigenetics is ways that the genes change, but not the DNA sequence, but the usage of the genes. So when we go back to our aging diagram, tissue damage exceeds tissue repair. The question was, what causes that? Gene expression is regulating the aging process. This is a very important thing to understand if you want to have a say in your aging. So now if we want to affect gene expression, we have to understand it. Very important. So how does a cell choose which genes to use? What determines gene expression? Critical questions. Dr. Bruce Lipton, when he was at University of Wisconsin, when he was at Stanford, did some really elegant experiments. He took stem cells, which are genetically identical. So this started out with one cell, grew 100,000 cells or so in a petri dish, split it into 3 dishes. So now you have 3 petri dishes, identical cells, genetically. One of them turned into bone cells, one turned into muscle cells, and one turned into fat cells because he varied the nutrients in each dish. So the environment in which the cells lived was determining which type of cell it became from the same exact genetics. Another experiment, he took dystrophic cells from human muscle, people with muscular dystrophy, dystrophy, a very brutal muscular disease. So he took muscle cells from people with that disease, put them in a healthy environment in a petri dish. They became healthy muscle cells. The environment, and more specifically, how the cells perceive the environment, is determining the biology of the cell. In a different environment, those cells were perfectly happy to be healthy. And what's really interesting is that, if two people are in the same room, one person might perceive very loving, safe environment. One person might be really scared based on past experiences and conditioning in the human brain and the subconscious. Well, the cells are the same way. They have a perception of the environment. So it's not just the environment, but how the cells perceive the environment determines which genes they choose to use, which to be on, which to be off, and how much. Here's another example. These two mice are genetically identical. They both have a mutation. The mutation's in the agouti gene. What it causes is obesity, heart disease, cancer, turns them yellow like this, and they become extremely overweight. Now, the mouse on the right, genetic twin, has the mutation, but when she was in utero, her mother was given extra vitamins. She was given vitamin B12, folic acid, choline. They supplemented the vitamins of the mother, and it completely shut down that mutation. So you have now a mutant, a agouti mouse that's completely normal. And what's amazing is when she gives birth to babies, you don't even have to supplement her, and she gives normal babies, still with the mutation. So the marks that are being made on the DNA are also heritable. They're passed on to the progeny, which is really an awesome thing. This is all power to us. Another really neat experiment. So Rainbow the cat was cloned. Okay, and there's Rainbow, calico cat. And, when I say cloning to, you probably think of these identical clones, that you've seen in movies or wherever. And what's really interesting, so they take DNA from Rainbow, they're going to make an exact copy of Rainbow. Well, here's the clone. It's called CC, carbon copy. And I run the vet program at a wild animal sanctuary, so I would rather call her CC than carbon copy. But CC is nothing like the mother. She doesn't act like the mother. Doesn't look like the clone. Doesn't act like the clone. Her body weight's different. They said her disposition's very different. But this is clone cat right here. So, this part of this started out for people wanting to clone a pet. And the truth of the matter is you can't make an identical version because they were grown up in different mothers. Even if the cat was grown in the same exact womb, the environment's different that time. Different experiences happen in the mother. They've even looked with women. When a woman is obese and has a baby, there's a very high chance that baby becomes obese. If that woman loses the weight down to healthy body weight and has a baby, that baby's 52% less likely to be obese out of the same womb because the environment's different now. And that's what we need to think about here because we want to have a say in our aging. So Dr. Dean Ornish in San Francisco did a really good study. He took men with early prostate cancer. He improved their nutrition, stress management, taught them meditation techniques. They went in social environment groups. They also did walking, more exercise. He changed the expression of over 500 genes in these men. And these were genes relating to cancer. The cancer genes were being shut down. The healthy genes were being turned up. Just by changing all these other things, over 500 genes got affected. So we're talking now human studies. So Time Magazine ran an article called Your DNA Isn't Your Destiny. Okay? Because your DNA isn't your destiny. Choices you make affect your genes. They also affect your children. And that's another thing to think about because a lot of people think that when a child's born, there's a clean slate and they're just starting out with their genes, and it isn't true. The thing I was referring to is called fetal origins. A lot of information is given in utero to the fetus for the rest of their life, but everything's changeable. Our gene expression's changeable. So here's Dr. Bygren, one of the authors of this paper, and his son and grandson. So there's 3 generations there. What they did was they looked at a remote community in Sweden on which they had data for hundreds of years in terms of how they were eating, whether they had a famine that winter or a lot of food available because it would be based on the harvest and things. They looked at boys, and when those boys were young, even one winter where they overate, if they had an abundance of food and they gorged, their grandchildren could live decades less long because they overate as a boy. It's this powerful. The information being put into the genes at that point was passed down several generations. So this boy, whether he's famine or overeating, has children, grandchildren, decades different in lifespan based on the eating as a child. And they found this also with the girls as well. So same thing. Overeating caused dramatic loss of lifespan for grandchildren. So not only do we affect our genes, we affect our children, grandchildren. We don't know how far those genetic marks or epigenetic changes are actually passed down. A brilliant paper was written in 1990 by Dr. Nihao, and it's called Metaphors and the Roles of Genes and Development. And this was a game changer. When a gene product is needed, a signal from its environment, not an emergent property of the gene itself, activates expression of that gene. So to simplify it, a signal from its environment activates expression of that gene. It's the interaction of the genes, the cells, and the environment. Genes cannot turn themselves on and off. That's not the job of a gene, if you will. The genes, as I told you, are the blueprint. They hold the information, but it's not their job to be on and off. You can't go to an architect and say, is the blueprint for the house on or off? It's a blueprint, okay? Our DNA is a blueprint. Genes do not self-activate. They're selected in response to our perception of the environment, to our cells' perception of the environment. So there's an interaction between our DNA and the environment. Dynamic interaction. There's a group of scientists called interactionists. The genes have a dynamic interaction between their environment. A lot of us were raised with the concept of nature versus nurture. Have you heard those words? It used to be like how much comes from our genes, how much comes from the environment. They're inseparable, okay? Gene expression is dynamically interrelated to perception of the environment. You can't separate them. My wife and I train and I teach a Japanese martial art called Aikido. And this is a picture of my beautiful wife, Christine, and me. And this man is the grandson of the founder of Aikido. He's the current doshu, the head of Aikido. His grandfather was O-sensei. And we took a picture here in Hambu Dojo in Japan. And it was quite a blessing. The reason I put this here is because we practice a lot of work with our breath, you know, using our tanden, we call it, dantian in Chinese, and breathing exercises, posture. But breath is something we're all doing throughout my talk right now. We're breathing continually. You can't live without breathing. We are constantly interacting with our environment, consciously or unconsciously. We're not isolated, whether it's eating, whether it's drinking water, but especially breath, because that's the most limited, that's the least amount of time you can go without something is breath, okay? So there's a dynamic interaction between us and our environment, between ourselves and our environment that's going on all the time. So our genes, constantly interacting with our environment, are producing gene expression, how we use our genes. So what's affecting our gene expression? The answer is everything, okay? How we're thinking, all of these things have been proven scientifically. Thoughts, emotions, how we manage stress, sun exposure, skin, anything you put on your skin, skincare, whether we eat well or we eat not so well, both affect gene expression, but in very different ways. Doing yoga, meditation, exercise has been shown to have a dramatic effect on gene expression. Toxins in the air, smoking, being happy versus not. All of these things affect our gene expression. And you have to understand that if you want to truly affect your health and your longevity. So how many genes do we have? The whole human genome has been mapped. When I was in school, it was really a hot topic and getting a lot of press at the time, thinking that this would be the answer to everything. Well, the truth is there's about 25,000 genes or a little less, but it turned out it's only 2% of our DNA. And it doesn't have, we have about 150,000 proteins, so it didn't account for one gene, one protein. So gene expression had to be learned about and developed in terms of the reality of what's going on. 25,000 genes, only 2% of our DNA. We have a lot of DNA in us. And we could go to the Earth, from the Earth to the sun and back more than 300 times with our DNA, the length of DNA in us. So there's a ton of DNA is what I'm wanting to say, but only 2% of it codes for protein. So is most of our DNA junk? I use the word junk because science for many decades said junk DNA. Any DNA they couldn't attribute to coding for a gene, they would call it junk. Well, certainly that doesn't make a lot of sense to me intuitively. And as science developed, less than 2% of our DNA codes for genes. There's a project called ENCODE, Encyclopedia for DNA Elements. 80% or more of our DNA codes for switches, turning genes on and off. Most of our DNA is involved in determining if our genes are being used and how much of them. And DNA is never alone. It's with protein. You know, it's about 50% protein, 50% DNA. So those proteins are intimately involved in regulating which genes are being used. But really the key is, why I'm telling you all this, is our health lies in those switches. So our gene expression determining our health is all based in which genes we're using and how much they're turned on. I put a dimmer here because you could turn a gene on a little, a lot, you can turn it off, you can turn it way on, but that is what's determining how healthy we are and how young we stay. ENCODE project said vast majority of human DNA seems to be involved maintaining an individual's well-being. This was a completely new thought because they thought we have genes and then the rest of it is doing whatever. Well, it's doing a lot. There's something called the Human Epigenome Project. Now, okay, so the genome sequence, now they're trying to find, science is trying to figure out how do you map all these genetic changes in the epigenome, in the gene expression world? It's almost infinite. And I ran one little example to show you from a single gene, you could do over 30,000 different versions of that gene based on these epigenetics or gene expression. So if you multiply that by our number of genes, that's over 750 million possibilities for how we can express our DNA. And it's more than that. So it's really a profound thing. And now this brings me to this point. There's cancer epigenetic centers all over the country, all over the world now, because science is now finding out that gene expression is way more involved in disease and health than genes, okay? They said there's actually a lot more epigenetic change than genetic change in the majority of cancers. 90 to 95% of cancer has no hereditary linkage. That means it doesn't matter if cancer's in your family and they say you have a family history. You don't have to get it. You don't have to get diseases that are in your family because they're not genetic. They're environmental. They're gene expression based. And science is knowing that now more and more. They've even studied in families where people are adopted, the adopted child will get cancer at the same rate as the family. They're not genetically related to them, but they start thinking the same way, they start eating the same way, they start having the same emotions, potentially negative thoughts, things like that, versus the healthy ones. Even when you hear about, oh, there's a cancer gene, it doesn't make sense because a gene can't do anything. It's genes interacting with the environment. So you have to ask yourself, if there's a so-called, there are some mutations in genes. Person inherits that. Let's say for 45 years they're totally healthy. And then all of a sudden cancer shows up. Well, what was different? Something changed in their environment. Or over time it did. But if it was truly a cancer gene, then it would be there all the time. There wouldn't be a time of healthy. And there's plenty of people that have these so-called cancer genes that are healthy. So how do you explain them? There's a lot more going on here, and it isn't genetic. This is the same with obesity. 5% maybe of obesity is genetic. Heart disease is the same way. It really doesn't matter. Mental health, very small genetic component to health. It's based in gene expression, and the science shows that. Men's Health ran an article about biggest nutritional breakthrough, nutrigenomics, study of the interaction between what you eat and your DNA. Everything you're choosing to eat is affecting your DNA, whether it's toward health and longevity or towards not. It's your choice, but it's scientifically shown. But wait, there's a little more. This part I have to tell you about before we move on into how to address our aging. There's something called the human microbiome. In our body, mostly in our gut, but on our body, we have tons of bacteria and other forms of microbes that are very helpful, healthy part of our life, critical part of our life. We're actually, cell for cell, there are more microbes in us than human cells. We're more microbe than human. And they're smaller, so they don't weigh as much, but there's literally 2 to 6 pounds of healthy bacteria in your gut. And you want them there. And I'll tell you why you want them there. First of all, they have over 100 times more genes than us. So there's a massive importance of gene expression in those bacteria, as well as the microbiome is so vital to our health. 70% of our immune system's in our gut. You may or may not know that, our own cells. Well, the bacteria interact with our immune system and help support it. They also help us get rid of microbes that shouldn't be there. They work on producing essential vitamins for us. They produce energy from our food, regulating blood sugar levels. There's so many things that bacteria do in our gut, and our health is so related to our gut health. Poor gut health leads to leaky gut I just put a few of them here: obesity, autoimmune diseases, mental health issues, arthritis, heart disease, cancers even are tied to poor gut health. Most disease will ultimately tie back to your gut. Good gut health leads to overall body health, strong immune system, healthy heart, improved mood, mental health, fertility, and ultimately longevity. So gut health is critical. The reason that I put it in this talk is because there is a major dynamic interaction between us and our environment, our cells and our human gene expression, but also the microbiome, which has many more genes than us, is interacting with the environment, and it's affecting our gene expression, and we're affecting its gene expression. So this is quite a major equation, but it gives you a lot of power to know that you have a say in all these things. Gene expression is the key to our health and longevity. That's my bottom line takeaway first message. You're not a victim to your DNA. Our DNA does not control our biology. Our biology is controlled by us interacting with our environment through choices we make, which then chooses our gene expression. Okay, we're not victims. We have a say in all of this. We're in charge. How we eat, how we exercise, supplements we take, how we feel, how we think, how our microbiome is managed. Everything affects how we use our genes. And this is my plea for world peace. All human beings are 99.9% genetically identical. Okay? The differences between people are in our gene expression patterns and are in our microbiome in our gut. And we have a say in all those. We're in charge of those things. We determine our health. A great, great master, I wanted to put this quote here: the mind is the power. A master said this because what you choose to focus on, decisions you make in your life, you have the power to determine how healthy you are, how young you are. It's up to you. We can affect how we age. Okay, now I'm going to tie all this together in terms of how we can actually affect this. Traditionally, most approaches to aging have been to hide aging, masking the symptoms. You know, there's a lot of different ways to do that. There's energy drinks to give you some energy, but none of these things actually affect aging. They're hiding it. And sometimes you're worse off at the end of the process, even though you get a little momentary relief. What if there was a way to restore your own youthfulness? Not just mask the fact that you're aging. Literally turning back the clock, whether it's on your skin, your energy level, your joints, your muscles, anything you want, your heart health. This gene-based approach is completely new, and it affects the aging process in a totally different way. Because now we're actually addressing the source of aging. We're addressing the gene expression patterns. And we're reversing them back to when we're younger, which restores the youthfulness. You see, cells have been shown to default to a state of youth. They're more than happy to be young if you give them the right information. Just like those muscle cells were more than happy to be healthy, moved into a healthy environment. And here's kind of a visual example. I like this one. I play the violin myself, and I love the symphony. I hope some of you do. But when we're young, if you think of all of our genes as a symphony orchestra, all the different genes are different instruments. The symphony sounds incredible when we're young, right? And I like the Berlin Philharmonic of one of them. And so I put a picture here. But each of these instruments is playing beautifully. Everybody's in tune and together. And as we get older, the symphony's still playing, but now it starts sounding a little more like a high school orchestra. So same instruments, same genes, played very differently. But with a gene expression-based approach, we can actually bring our orchestra back to sounding again like a youthful orchestra, like a symphony, like a Berlin Philharmonic. It's all that potential is sitting in the genes all along. They just need the right information. So, company I work with discovered something called aging defense mechanisms. And what they are is when we're young, these aging defense mechanisms maintain our youth. They protect us and they keep us young. As we get older, these aging defense mechanisms break down and they stop working as well. And that leads to the process of aging. The good news is those aging defense mechanisms can be turned back on. We can actually restore youth to the human body. And here's why. Because gene expression controls the aging defense mechanisms. And my whole talk right now is led up to showing you that we can control our gene expression. Our gene expression controls the aging defense mechanism. So when the gene expression's in the right state, the aging defense mechanisms are active and our youth is preserved. Now what happens over time, aging aggressors, which are environmental things, toxins, pollution, pesticides in food, food quality, emotional things, thoughts, whatever it is, even just the internal metabolism of our body produces toxins that have to be gotten rid of. But all of those aging aggressors affect the gene expression. And what happens is the aging defense mechanisms stop working as well, and that leads to the process of aging, age-related deterioration, if you will. The good news is, so we found through gene expression, there are positive gene expression ingredients, and we have put them into a supplement. And this is very advanced gene expression technology, but you can literally take those positive gene expression ingredients that are found through gene expression science. They affect the gene expression, which then reactivates these aging defense mechanisms, and systemic youth benefits occur, which means full body youth benefits. You can return youth to the human body. And the aging defense mechanism, I'm going to show you them. One of them is antioxidant defense. That's internal antioxidants our body makes, as well as external antioxidants we have to eat from foods, supplements. Detoxification and stress response, DNA protection and repair, tissue renewal, metabolism, and inflammatory balance. Now, each of these alone, and most of you are probably quite health conscious, each one of these alone has a huge effect on reversing aging or staying young. Together, they do extremely well. And these aging defense mechanisms regulate our body's innate potential to stay young. That's their job. And this works throughout the body systems: cardiovascular, nervous, digestive, respiratory, muscular systems, skeletal and joints, even the endocrine system. All of the body systems are affected by these same aging defense mechanisms, which makes sense. So, as one example, you take the right gene expression ingredients, you give them to the human brain, and you reactivate the ADMs, the aging defense mechanisms. For the brain, DNA protection and repair, tissue regeneration, even neurogenesis, new nerve growth in the brain, cellular stress response, metabolism regulation, that's sugar metabolism, lipid, fat metabolism, inflammation, balancing inflammation in the brain, throughout the body. I'm just giving you an example. Antioxidant defense and protection. So it's profound, and what that leads to is incredible brain health. But it's always there. Like I said, the orchestra can always go back to the young orchestra. Aging defense mechanisms revitalize the body. Cognitive function and neuroprotection. So when you take that supplement with those ingredients, support healthy brain structure and function, promotes youthful cognition and memory, promotes a sense of well-being and healthy mood. Because even mood and well-being tied to gene expression. So, aging defense mechanisms, when appropriately reset, can return to the human body brain health, heart health, immune health, metabolic health, bone health, joint health, eye health, skin health, hair health, physical performance, and brain health. I said already, but I can say twice. This is 2 months of hair. Okay, I was bald from chemo 2 months ago, but by resetting my aging defense mechanisms, I have a thick, nice head of hair, don't you think? So when we go back to the orchestra analogy, aging defense mechanisms are an order above now. And what I mean by that is, so originally I was saying, you have to affect all these groups of genes in the orchestra, right, to make yourself younger. Aging defense mechanisms target major players, the conductor, the concertmaster, first cellist, the first clarinetist. When you affect the concertmaster, all the first violins will follow. And in a sense, the whole orchestra will. But if you get to the first tuba, the other tubas are going to follow. And so the aging defense mechanisms are kind of like higher order, almost master genes that control many genes underneath them. So it's a very potent thing. There's literally thousands of genes that are in these aging defense mechanisms and get affected when you take the right ingredients in a supplement. And what that leads to is protecting our youth. And it's available to us all the time. So, in closing, the youth, I turn this around now from aging to youth, because we can literally go back to a state of youth because gene expression controls the aging defense mechanisms, and that's controlling how young we are. But you can be as young as you want at any age. There are people that live over 100 in all kinds of cultures. You know it's possible. Younger and healthier. So this is more like a youth span. We call this youth, not lifespan, not just living longer. Living long, young. You know, I run the vet program at the Oregon Tiger Sanctuary, and we have one of our gene expression supplements for cellular energy. We have all the big cats on it, all the primates, all the dogs and cats are on it, as well as the humans. But we have some of the oldest living tigers that have ever lived in captivity. I mean, it works extremely well with animals as well. So it's really quite exciting to me. So longevity and youth are in our hands. It's truly up to us. All you have to do, you have to make a decision. Do you want to be healthy? Do you want to be young? And you have to then make the appropriate choices to support that decision. Because as I've told you, every choice we make affects our gene expression. So you can learn how to manage stress differently. You can learn how to eat differently. You can learn how to be happier. All these different things. It's up to you. And so every choice you're making in gene expression either is leading you toward aging or leading you towards health and youth. There's no in between. You're going one way or the other. You can't do it at the same time. So it's up to you. And my point today was to tell you that that choice is in your hands. You control your genes. Your environment interacting with your cells controls your genes, and it's completely up to you. You can reach me anytime you like on Facebook, Robert Nagato Needleman. If you have more questions, Christine and I, my wife, will be out in the lobby with a table, and we can tell you more about our supplements, and we're going to show you our biophotonic scanner in just a minute. But I hope this was helpful to you and stimulating some thinking, and thank you very much.
Awesome.